So a little bit about myself. My name is Jay. I'm the online pastor, Jay Kranda. I'm the online pastor at Saddleback Church, a church down the ways in Orange County. And I do ministry online, done a couple different roles in ministry. I'll share that bits and pieces throughout this talk. And I'm really excited to talk about community. And I really believe, obviously, the church has some kind of proprietary kind of tech, advantage in this area. We get to offer something that no other person can even begin to touch on. And I think there's ways digitally that we can harness this. There's also some fears there that a lot of people run from, and I want to touch on a couple of those areas. I'm going to share a lot of practical aspects, really, from all I know, and that's through really doing ministry online. So in the context of doing services online, and then at Saddleback, we do actually small groups online and in homes, and so we do that in a lot of different areas. So I'll share that. That's going to be my angle. But I believe at the essence of what we do and where people are at is really at that heart of being known, that most people want to be known in some way. So unfortunately, a lot of people have been hurt. And we encounter this if we've been part of a church, or we see this in our families. Some of us, unfortunately, may have encountered this ourselves, that a lot of people have been beaten up, abused. They're not hearing things like, I love you, or you're important at their workplace or in their homes, in their marriages. And really everything online, from Facebook, Twitter, all these touch points are kind of shadows of ultimately of that idea of being known in some way. And some people are doing it really good, and some people are abusing it and are using it in a lot of different angles. And I think of it as kind of like the Grinch's heart. A lot of people are seeking to be known, but their heart has shrunken 3 times too small, and it's kind of hardened and black. And the question is, can they even begin to be, known really, truly? And I believe, obviously, that can happen. We're not going to get into theologically how they get out of that. But ultimately, I believe online is a way that we can penetrate that. It's one of those amazing ways that we can kind of get around that and work at that and empower our churches. And ultimately, Jesus is the only way that's going to fill that. I really do believe that. I dedicated my life to full-time ministry, and I think Jesus is the only way to fill that missing piece and really restore. And we have one of the greatest goals. Both, it doesn't matter if you work for a church or if you work in the business. If you're a follower of Christ, you do the same thing, growing God's kingdom. Some of us do that internally through our organizations. You're shining light, showing what it means to have Christian ethics and so forth. And some of us get to do that a little bit more directly in the context of church. And so what I see is that with online technologies, really platforms, we get the chance to either receive a platform, reject it, or redeem it, kind of that idea. And so there's some platforms we probably should just reject. There's a story a couple weeks ago about the priest that was really anti-gay and then had the Grindr account. I don't know if you're familiar with Grindr, but it's maybe you shouldn't be familiar with Grindr. But it's where, it's where same-sex couples find each other, and it's not for friendship, it's very, sexual. And so the idea is that maybe that's a platform the church can't directly redeem. There might be some creative ways. I don't know. I have no idea. Somebody might have a bigger thinking. But there's also some channels we can receive and redeem. Obviously, Facebook is entrenched into our culture, so there's a lot of easy ways. Haley was sharing a bit earlier, and you've heard tons of examples. I was watching last night online Brian's talk. Tons of ways that you can leverage technology, specifically on Facebook, Twitter, all these ways. But the idea is that we approach this and we think strategically. We just don't get scared and run from all the scary things that are happening. I remember my first job, it wasn't a job, I was an intern at my church that I accepted Christ in. I was a high school pastor. And I remember our middle school ministry, in 2006, set up a MySpace account. And they set up this MySpace account, and I was familiar with MySpace. I wasn't active. None of my friends were active. And I'm an online pastor, but what you'll find out about me, I'm very practical. I'm not going to go run to something unless my friends are using it. So I think that's the other thing, that I'm very practical. I only have so many hours in the day, and I have specific goals. So I'm going to use the platforms that really empower that and help me. So I think that's the other thing. You got to be strategic. I'm not the innovation pastor. Really online is just where people are at, and I'm going to be ministering to those people. And with the MySpace account, I remember when our church, this is 2006, so, online wasn't as, entrenched as it is today. I remember everybody was saying stuff like, the middle school ministry can't have a MySpace account. Those are like pedophiles and pervs are on there or something. And I was like, what? Like, really? And I was like, well, okay. And I remember I was so like, I wasn't sure. But their goals were very strategic. Like, they were trying to reach middle school students. And at that time, MySpace was heavily being used at that age. And they were building relationships with middle school students that weren't coming. And really, all they had was 1 hour a week to impact middle school students, and they realized they could leverage that. Now for you, in your context, that's gonna look very different. I think, and because I'm from Saddleback, we have campuses all around the world now, and we learned that some platforms are more interactive in other places, and some platforms are non-existent. And so for you gotta figure out what's working and who's your target, and you navigate that. And part of it is really, I think, redeeming some of this technology for some powerful things. The ways that you can kind of flip the platforms on your head. One example, in our context, we have learned with doing church online that one of kind of like the dirty secrets of church online is that like there's a high bounce rate. So you land on a page and then they leave immediately. And so the hard part is that you can pay money to get people on there and that can work, and there's some good strategies around that. But the other part is like you feel accountable for these people. So what's working, what's not working, and you're trying to figure out. And so with us, what we're trying to figure out is that how do we target a online stream in order to eventually get an unbeliever come to know Christ. So somebody to come to know Jesus and come to live for Jesus. And so we've thought through like maybe our online stream isn't the most user-friendly for somebody who really doesn't know Christ. And so there's some things we can do and we have done to kind of make that a little bit more friendly. But maybe there's some extra projects we can do. And so thinking about turning a platform on its side, one thing that we're experimenting with is that we're doing this kind of interactive game that's in a browser. That it's really a, Pastor Rick Warren wrote Purpose-Driven Life, and we're taking this book that's been sold millions of copies, we're taking it more in an interactive game style. And it's not really for the Christian, it's for the unbeliever, somebody who's searching. So the idea is like, okay, if you have, you're gonna live this many hours in your life, take a couple minutes and just examine what the purpose is, and it's kind of this interactive experience. And the idea is that we're kind of leading them through the content of the book, and slowly we wanna and we joke internally that we wanna create this habitual church watcher. And so, because ultimately, internally, we have this goal that we track our attendance off 30-minute watchers. And so just selfishly, I get judged off how many people watch 30 minutes, not how many people visit our page. So my goals are a little different. And so with that, we started to create this interactive experience. Well, the conversation was, how do we not make it a bait and switch where somebody goes from this like interactive game to a church service? Aren't we going to lose a lot of people? So one of the thoughts, and I'm going to kind of like Brian was talking about this last night, like sometimes you just scrap things. This might be something that we scrap. But the thought was, what if we just create, instead of like pushing them to our website, which is saddleback.com/online, and that might be foreign to them, because most people who don't know church, they're not going to know who my pastor and my boss is or our church. They're just going to be searching. Well, what if we just create a channel that's familiar in their environment? Well, since it's a game, why don't we go to a gaming platform? And so we're going to create a channel. We're going to experiment with this, creating a channel on Twitch. So Twitch is a channel that's one of the most interactive, the top 4 in video content. Gamers upload and you watch other gamers play. It's huge. It's huge. There was a great article in Wired magazine about a year ago that explains kind of the reach of this. But what if instead of us just trying to push them to our site, why don't we push to where people are meeting and gathering? And Twitch is one of those places. There's a lot of things, again, with that kind of thought process. But the idea is we're not going to just run from that. It's a gaming platform and so forth. Maybe we can redeem it and think strategically and figuring out how to get there. Now, there's some things, licensing and so forth, we got to walk through. That's why we might have to scrap it. And we might set something up and Twitch decides to shut us down. We don't know. But we're trying to think about if we want to build community, if we ultimately want to grow God's kingdom, I think we can redeem some of these channels. And so with that, I think the idea here is that all these guys from Facebook, from like Bizstone and Jack Dorsey, whoever's setting up what, they're going to have their own motives. They're creating these channels very purposely, and some of them are very clear. Like if it's Google, like don't be evil, or for others it might be building, this profile to like, like the guy from Tesla, it's to get rid of fossil fuels. Any technology, anything that's moving towards, I think the key is that we can figure out how to kind of sabotage that and figure out how to really capitalize and tap them into our goals, which is to grow God's kingdom. And so what I love about this idea of flipping and not really seeing the potential, I love the story of Steve Jobs when he bought the rights to Pixar. When he did that, he actually bought it from George Lucas. And Pixar, that technology at the time was very limited, but it was really all built around the 3D rendering, really to fuel kind of the technology for the Star Wars movies, since that didn't exist in Hollywood at the time. So he created this company, this division, and eventually he was really reluctant to sell it, and he eventually did because he got a divorce and he had to divvy up his assets, and that wasn't something that wasn't producing a lot of profit. And he sold it to Steve Jobs. But when Steve bought it, he was very intentional that he wanted to buy it to really fuel the next generation of computers. He thought something with this technology was somehow going to make the experience of the computer better. He wasn't sure what that is. At the time, he was at NeXT, so he was trying to beat Apple and all this stuff. Well, eventually he found out that he was trying to push storytellers to be software developers, and it wasn't working. And so there's a lot of friction, and guys like John Lasseter and so forth were part of that conversation. And eventually Steve jumped out of it and he said, okay, just make movies or tell stories. And eventually Pixar came out of that. And a couple weeks before he passed, he has this famous kind of, not quote, but mention that he says to one of his friends at Pixar, he says, it's so funny how, how things changed with Pixar, because now I've come to the realization that, now I think of the idea that all Apple products will end up in landfills eventually, but Pixar movies will live on forever. And how that kind of came and shifted. Now there's a lot there, story, obviously, there's something deep there. But ultimately, even with Steve Jobs, he didn't see the full potential with Pixar. He was trying to fit it. I think with Facebook, Twitter, whatever channel it is, and by the time this gets uploaded somewhere, it'll be something else. They don't even understand. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't understand his potential. He didn't even understand it when he was creating it in a dorm room. And I think for us, we got to figure out how to creatively leverage that. We're doing that with things like Twitch, trying to figure that out, other channels, and ultimately I'll unpack how that makes sense in our context. But we got to figure out how can we redeem and utilize these channels to grow God's kingdom. And in our context, where we do church in Orange County and now online, we really see that there's three struggles that people wrestle with. It's people in our area or online and really anywhere. It's people are way too busy. Busyness is an issue. They're dealing with materialism and they're dealing with isolation. So busyness, materialism, and isolation. And so for us, in a church context, we combat locally busyness with the importance of making God a priority with a daily time with God. So we talk about that. You can come to a class and you learn that. Giving, materialism, we combat that with giving. That you can't just hoard all these assets, you got to ultimately give back to God, both tithing to your local church and then somehow giving beyond that, an offering. And then with isolation, at Saddleback, we have small groups. So that's a very big part of this, that you can't be isolated. And we say very purposely the idea of you may have 1,000 friends on Facebook or 10,000 followers, but nobody really knows you. That idea that you're hurting, you have a rough relationship with maybe one of your kids or in your marriage, or if at your work your boss is treating you like junk, and nobody knows that. Really, it's not just having friends, it's actually people knowing you, going back to that essence. I think, I know these three things can be tackled online. And there's a lot of powerful ways you can kind of combat busyness, combat materialism, combat isolation. Now, some people are doing it better than others. Some people have half-stepped. Some of what we're doing at Saddleback with our online outreach, there's been big evolutions in it, and there's been some big failures in there too. I could tell you what's working, what's not working. So, and the cool thing is, a lot of this stuff is obviously not, you don't got to go out and hire a developer and go out. You've heard with YouVersion, that's something we push heavily with the quiet time. It's create a plan, go on there and read through John or search a different plan on anxiety, different topics. And we say that very purposely. I have videos that if you accept Christ, I kind of do this 3-minute video where I kind of do this kind of pitch of what does it mean. And in that video, I push YouVersion, like going down there and starting to read every day one of the chapters, one chapter a day through the book of John. And the idea is that we didn't need to go out and develop something. You know what I mean? We can use that. It's an amazing resource we could never even begin to get near. And so the same thing with isolation. There's ways that you can leverage Facebook groups for community. You know, yeah, we have our own kind of a group system, but there's things that the Facebook group doesn't do that our group system is. So I always say we have online groups, and I'll share a little bit about that. But really with online groups, you don't have to go out and build your own thing. You can go pilot it, beta it, see how your community reacts, do a couple Facebook groups and see if there's a response. If there's no response, maybe it can't work in your context. Maybe you got to reskin it, maybe it's something else. Everything's not, you know, obviously we have similar goals, but it's going to be, our methods might look very different depending who we're reaching. And so I think there's a way to leverage this and tackle each one of these problems with busyness, materialism, and isolation. And in our context, so again, just very practical, when I think digital, I'm going to think my day-to-day job with being an online pastor. And so with our online stream, you know, Saddleback always struggled with the idea of having an online stream because Rick was very clear that he didn't want to be a televangelist. That's something that he was very honest about. Just from personal, that was his own conviction. So with the online stream, we always kind of wrestled with how does that look? So the idea was we can't just build a crowd to build a crowd. We have to build a crowd to funnel people correctly. So that was the key. And for a long time, we didn't know how to funnel that in our strategy, or to do it. Sometimes you have the ability, but the tools don't exist. And so for us, we struggled with that. And so actually, like in the mid-90s, we were one of the first churches with a website. If you go to one of like the archive pages, you can see old website. It is so bad. It's like bright pink. What? Wayback Machine. Oh yeah, Wayback. Yeah. You know, I've used it. Oh, all I know. You look at it. Go to Wayback Machine and type in Saddleback Church. It's like bright pink. I don't know if it was like Breast Cancer Awareness Month when we built it. But the idea is, though, we got up there. And it wasn't until 2005 we started streaming. I know DJ's checking it right now. Yeah, I know. I knew he was. In 2005, we started streaming our live services. At the time, 5 live services. So not till 2005. And when we did that, the funny thing was it was behind a lock screen. So you actually had to come to 101 to get a password in order to watch the service. And so the reason was that we didn't want to build this crowd. And so at that point, it was kind of fighting against us, but we were still in this internal struggle of figuring out how to leverage it. The funny thing was that everybody started giving me the password. They were just, you know, sending out this password. I've met people like, oh, I used to get my friend gave me the password. And I'm like, yeah, how did you get that? And so it was passed through, DJ probably posted somewhere online for people to find. And so it wasn't until 2009 is when I got engaged in it. And I just finished actually undergrad here at Biola in the Christian education program. Actually, it's been renamed since I've left. But and I saw this stream pretty much. I got hired onto the communications team as the people person pretty much. They had all these creatives, and they wanted this ministry person to help out with building some teams. And so I was like, okay, I like people. I can do ministry wherever. And essentially, I used a lot of the skills that I had learned here at Biola, building systems and caring for people and all that. That's what the CE program at the time was about and what it is now. And I saw so much potential. We had I think a couple hundred people showing up, and no one was even looking at this thing. And I was like, really? No one's even thinking about leveraging this online stream? And so I started getting engaged, and we were only doing 5 services. And the first thing was start raising up some volunteer teams and so forth. And then it went from that to we did 10 rebroadcast services during the week. And we just took our content and scheduled it. At the time, it was called Simulated Live. I have no idea why we use that language, Simulated Live. It's like such forced, ugly language, looking back. And then we went in 2002, we went a service every 2 hours. So we just started doing every 2 hours. Because I was like, if we do rebroadcast, can't we just do it unlimited? Why don't we just continue? Well, of course, the next year we did every hour. You know, we continued. And then this past year, we actually went to just 6 live services and then fully on demand. And we use our streaming provider, for those who are interested, we use Alchemy, which is very popular. And they have this cool add-in through Pixel. And it's actually technology we use because we're a multi-site campus where you're able to DVR the live stream immediately. And so the idea, there is no buffering or anything like that. You can literally just archive it immediately. And it's kind of, even if you join a live sermon on our weekend, you can scrub back to the beginning. So we kind of used that. We said, why don't we just provide an archive immediately? And the reason why we actually went away from kind of rebroadcast and everything is this question of known, this question of community came up. Is that we saw more and more people weren't just watching by themselves, but people were watching with other people. And this is what I want to encourage you all as you're thinking about things in church context and so forth, is that, online obviously is about community and relation. You probably heard that a couple of different times throughout this time here. But ultimately, I think that you can use this online, all these online tools to start up little pockets of people meeting. 2009, when I started to engage with the online campus, we had pretty much just a stream, a chat box that was very like AOL, like it just screamed that. And it was very basic, and we had just like a public email. And I got this email in 2009 of this couple that were dating in Hong Kong. And they were pretty much setting up a screen in Hong Kong in their dorm and inviting people over and watching the service. And they sent me this photo. And I was like, it was one of those moments you kind of get a little warm. You're like, what? How is that happening? It wasn't something we were doing. It was just like, it just organically happened. And when that happened in 2009, I just, my mind started racing. We started talking, and there were so many things that we started dreaming about. And the cool thing is, jump to the end of the story, last year we launched our Hong Kong campus. And Jack and his wife became part of the launch team of Saddleback Hong Kong. And they actively engage, and they've had 2 kids since then and so forth. And so that's one of those things, you go from online to offline. You leverage an online resource and you strategically funnel them to something physically. Now obviously that happened very nicely, but Saddleback can't go to every city. We can't be everywhere. Sometimes that might look like where I might find out somebody's in some city and I'm able to strategically send them to a church that I'm aware of. So I've sent people to Life Church. I've sent them to all sorts of churches. I got an email one time from somebody who lived in Dallas and said, yeah, there's no good churches in my area. I was like, okay, you're in Dallas. You're in Mecca. You're a liar. Like, let's talk about this. And I gave them like 4 churches. Go here, go here, go here, go here. And if you can't get connected here, then there's something wrong with you. And but the idea is that there's so much more potential. And that's when we started really to get serious. And that's when Saddleback as a church started seeing like we could set it up where we can actually funnel and making it a win for our goals, and no longer just build a crowd. Crowds are not a bad thing. Those are good things. There's a lot. Sometimes you build it and then you figure out later, and you kind of happen into a success. And other times you can be more strategic. We were very strategic with some of our budget. And so part of that is staffing hours and so forth. And so for us, we tapped into something about this idea of where we're going to go in the future and future launches. So with us, and really my job, is that I'm supposed to help inform wherever Saddleback is going to go next. And so 2 ways. We do that through general data that's gathered through our data of geo data that's collected, and we can drive down into cities. The other thing is that if you're watching anywhere in the world, you can host a group. So for us, what that meant was we had to figure out one way we do that is online groups. And so people meet online. So an online group is just you meet in a browser, and you have a private space to interact with each other. At Saddleback, we own some of our own small group material, and so we had the ability we had to create some kind of function behind a closed wall. There's a lot of ways. You don't have to build this. You can do it through Right Now Media. It's an amazing resource. Most people use Right Now Media. I think it's a way, pretty much you can give your church members access to small group material. It's an amazing resource. But for us, the first iteration of this in like 2009, 2010 was starting with online groups, just meeting online and figuring out like how can we do this. And then about 3 years ago, 2012, we kind of unleashed this. We used to have this limit where you had to be a member of our church in order to host a group. And we actually did it kind of the reverse. If you signed up to a host, you had to become a member in the first 60 days. And if you didn't become a member, we deleted your group, or we kind of reorged it. And so online, the problem was not everybody could take membership. And actually to this day, membership isn't something we offer to our online community directly. And so what we allowed, though, we allowed, since we are trying to inform where future plants are going, is that we allowed people to become members online, host a group in your home. We allowed people to host a group in your home without becoming a member. And we kind of made them promise to become a member in one future point. And so what happened was we really had this unleashing. And we've had, at this current time, we have over 1,800 small groups that meet in homes that are directly under the online campus, and another 500 that are online only. So I have a total of 1,400 small groups that are under the online campus. I have more small groups under me than any other of the regional campuses at our church. We have 10 regionals. And so outside of our main Lake Forest campus, the online campus in this series, we just launched a bunch of new groups. The online campus was 30% of the growth from all these new groups launched. And the amazing thing is that, like, for me, it's like a no-brainer. But I'm still trying to educate people. Like, no, like, you're not just reaching people in Orange County. You're not, like, there's people all around the world that want to hear this. They want to be part of this series. They want to grow. They want to grow spiritually. And this is a no-brainer. And so we just tapped into something accidentally, really, that we started to see the potential of not just streaming our content online, not just offering, what we believe statements and so forth. We wanted to leverage and make wins for our church, not just locally, but online. And so part of that is figuring out, okay, what are your wins? And then translating that into an online culture. For us, it's informing where future plans are. So just open the floodgates. So instead of having, sometimes when you're planning a church, you might spend $250K like that between, advertisements to renting buildings, leasing, whatever the world you got to do, staff hiring, all that. Some people are really good at that. And some people, unfortunately, there's a lot of buildings that are empty now because churches didn't do it wisely. And so with Church Online, what if, and I've already heard kind of moments of this, is that what if more churches, before they even get into the realm of spending money, what if you just set up kind of your ideal service, you capture it, you put it on a page, and you do some targeted advertising to these areas and see how people receive it. And see, okay, we're getting a better retention over here. And we were thinking we needed to go into the city, but really we need to go in the suburbs. That's really where our style of church is kind of being more received. Now, obviously, there's mix there. You got to go where God wants you to go, but you also got to be wise with the resource and be good stewards and everything. I think this is the potential that we've already seen in small ways. And so the funny thing is, when I started all this, I thought I was going to be, when like people ask me, like, I'm the online pastor, my wife doesn't even get what I do. She'll be at like other pastor wives are or whatever, and like, what is your online? What is that? I don't know. And but really, I'm just. We were just talking about this before. I'm just a pastor, and it just happens to be my people. I make the first connection online, and really at the heart of what I do personally, because my church is such a priority of our church kind of philosophy, is small groups. I'm really a small groups pastor, and so internally, I'm actually. My title might be online campus pastor, but we're not really a campus at this present moment in our kind of evolution of whatever is going on. I'm actually more positioned as an affinity. So I'm kind of like positioned as a men's pastor or a women's pastor, because I actually funnel people both locally and I funnel people internationally. I've had core volunteers part of every international launch. So people part of our Berlin launch, people part of our Manila. Our Manila launch, one of the coolest stories was, I got this email in about 2010 of this lady who sends me this email and says, hey, I want to start streaming your services in this prison. And I'm like, oh, you're in a prison? What? And she says, yeah, when I was later in my life, I made a lot of money, and I actually I was committing fraud. And I ended up getting caught when I was in my late 40s. And I was sentenced pretty much to a life sentence in this prison in Manila. And I was in this all-women's prison. And I happened to stumble across your pastor's book, Purpose-Driven Life. And I started reading it, and my life was changed. I accepted Christ, and I found out you had sermons. And I just want to ask, is there any way I can get like a DVD and stream and offer up the sermons in this prison? And I was like, okay, let's think through that. There's something there. I don't know how to write international addresses. I don't know. Those forms confuse me so much. And we figured it out. We tested out. We sent a couple DVDs, and we kind of send them in packs every month, like kind of 5 DVDs at a time. And we kind of did this regularly, and we had a system set up. And just last week, this is 3 years later, she sends me attendance every week and updates. Last week she had 335 women watching the sermon online. So through this DVD. It's crazy. Like I get that email and I'm like, what? I don't even get that. Like I grew up at a church like a little bit bigger than that. Like my church was 500 growing up. I can't even understand that there's 335 women and they have 20 small groups. And now the cool thing is we have a campus in Manila. And so now there's partnerships and beginning to figure out like, okay, now it's no longer I'm, in California in Orange County and she's in Manila. Now there's like there's touch point. And so there's like this web that's getting created. And the beauty is I know that there will be a time in the next year, 2 years, where she will no longer talk to me. She will talk to Neri, who's the campus pastor there. And that's the beauty of setting up this potential. And so what I want to encourage you in what you're doing is think through how you can leverage online, not just social media, not just a website, but think about how you can really accomplish your church's strategy. So what is it? To launch more campuses? Is it to get to a certain number? Is it to, I don't know what it is. But for us, it's informing where future plans go. I'm not just worrying about, how many attendance is on every week. I'm really worrying about the groups. And most of my job, yes, I have strategy and all that other stuff, but most of my job is I'm just taking care of email. People are hurting. I got an email like in this meeting that I was talking a little bit about. I got this email for this person who lives in Lithuania that wants to they go to this college. They moved away from United States. They live in Lithuania, and they want to maybe figure out how they can have an extension experience of our church on their campus. So there's some learnings I can talk through, but I got to figure that out. So more of my job is more about people and figuring out how to set up more things. For your church, it's figuring out that transition. And I think the big thing is that with online, obviously, it's moving so quickly, so there's a sense of urgency. But having those conversations of like, how can we, instead of just doing this one-off event, is there a way or something we should be doing in the future that's more digital? Is there another version of this? And I think about the idea that, with culture, with every passing moment, it feels like with every story that gets released, what we believe is more and more muddied and foggy, and people are really not understanding what we really are about. And so the hard part is, it used to be you would set up a church by just, you'd put a cross on top of a building, and then that would be the outreach to the community, 100 years ago. But in our culture now, more and more people are walking past our churches and not even having the faintest idea of what's happening inside of there. And so with online, specifically with Church Online, both and with social media telling stories strategically of people, real people who are part of your church, you're able to go directly to them and kind of clear the fog. And I would hate for there to be the day of like the early days of the church where like people like, you're drinking blood and doing what? What's going on? Well, it's because nobody knew what was happening. Now it's kind of the reverse. We're oversaturated. And now it's like, well, aren't you a fundamentalist, or do you marry a lot of people, or what? Nobody knows. It's like more and more are unchurched, more and more don't have a clear understanding of really, like, do you really live by what the Bible says? Like, what does that mean? Do you throw stones at each other? I don't know. But that's the idea. It's coming from that perspective of the person who doesn't know Christ. It's like, and so I struggle with that with our website all the time. That's why we were thinking about, like, instead of dropping these unbelievers who are just learning about Jesus, throwing them on our church website, we have a very nice church website. We do. But there are language like connect and so forth that still I struggle with. What do they think of? Like, what are the images that are popping up in their head when they see these words? I've been a Christian for 15 years now. Like, I'm very entrenched. I'm no way. I'm very biased in how I see things. I'm definitely when I see connect, I think fellowship. You know what I mean? Like, that's the things. But more and more, it's listening to people. I think that's one of the great things about with your churches and whatever you're doing. It's maybe you don't have the ability to hire a church online guy or whatever, a girl, whatever. Maybe it's figuring out in your church, in your like areas of influence, who is really doing this well. One of the greatest places, obviously, is people in the workplace, like businesses that are growing. If there's a guy there, maybe you can just go look at your tithing that's increased. Like, who's that? Maybe they're doing something with advertisement. But like empowering people. Haley was talking about this before. Haley's amazing at this, at empowering people. I did her job before, and trust me, I was not good at it compared to what Hal Haley's doing it. But that's the idea. There's people that are really good at, are able to look through the lens. Part of that, you might need a new website. Part of it, you might need to really revamp the graphical look. But I would start thinking about some of these areas strategically. For us, one of the biggest kind of in the realm of church online, we have really 3 platforms that we focus a lot. We have our church experience, and that's saddleback.com/online. You can experience the service 24/7. The other 2 areas, and this is directly related to our goals as a church. So another area is that we needed to provide a way for our groups to meet with each other. And so we had to have some kind of private group experience that was linked to our database. And so we built, and also linked to our sermon, kind of our small group material. And so we built something. And then the last one is with providing classes online in some capacity. We needed to be able to hold events and seminars and so forth. And so we integrated that into, we have something called My Saddleback. It's self-built. But again, you can do this through Right Now Media. You can do this through Facebook groups. There's a lot of ways you can do this. I think too many churches are still holding like the physical event and thinking that like that's gonna be the end all. Like, oh, I'm doing this membership class. Saddleback even struggled. We still do a 4-hour membership class. I love Saddleback, but like that class is 4 hours. You know, like I have 2 kids. It was tough figuring out like what, you know, I didn't want to get a babysitter for 4 hours. I would rather do something else if someone's watching my kids. And so with that, it's figuring out maybe there's a way you need to transition digitally. I still hear it with people with online, like that idea that if I stream stuff online, if I put it online, no one's going to show up locally. I hate that. I hate that. The reason is because I think that means that your live experience is just crappy. Like it should be a premium. It should be a premium experience for them to show up physically. My hope is we put it online and they get a taste of what it really is, and it drives them physically. And if that is true, that means that physical experience isn't offering that much more. The physical experience should be what's happening on the patio after the service. How do you connect and welcome people? There's so much there that is done so well. There's ways you can do that online, but it doesn't even begin to touch on what can happen physically. And I think that's the idea, is that we're doing our online stream to ultimately grow the kingdom of God. And in our context, wherever we're at, and then ultimately informing where we're going. See, for me, when I was going through a rough phase in my life, my parents got divorced very young. My mom spent a lot of her life raising just me and my 2 brothers. And she ended up, when I was in middle school, high school, went through a heavy, heavy drug problem and was bringing all sorts of shady people in and out of my home. And I remember I hated being home. It wasn't peaceful. And me and my brothers were very aggressive people, and we just, I'm not physically aggressive, obviously, because I'm not a big guy, but we're very verbal. I'm very sarcastic, gets me in trouble constantly. But the idea is that this home life was not healthy, it wasn't peaceful. And I remember I got invited to a church. From a cousin. And somebody just said, you know, hey, you got nothing going on Saturday night? And I was like, I don't, because I would rather not be home. And that transition from going from middle school to high school. And I got invited, and that night I accepted Christ, and it forever changed the trajectory of my life. Like I don't even begin to understand what I would be doing, and God saved me. And the reason why I love, at least digitally, everything that's happening online, it's just websites and Web2, all that stuff, and church online. What I love about that is that we get to be able to do something that physical churches are doing now, but we can just ramp it up. See, most churches are only open a couple hours a week to the public, and then that building stays dormant. But with church online, we get to be able to have a 24/7 connection. It's that coffee shop that's always open. You know, I hate that, you've been up at night, it's like 9:30 or 9:25, and you're like, oh man, I really want something from Starbucks. Oh, it's closed. Yeah, man. I do that all the time. But the idea with church online, it's never closed. It's always going. There's always something going on. And again, it's not the end all. Set it up, create it, make it so that it can spur on something future. So for us, it's ultimately we're trying to drive them somewhere, and we make it really easy to host a group, and we want to infuse that and grow it. And we even have a strategy to grow it organically to a campus. So we say, hey, start a group. 6 weeks, great. Okay, go through this small group material. Focus on health for the first 6 months. And then in the first 6 months, all I want to say, focus on health and getting to know everybody. And then I want you to maybe pick up 1 or 2 people that can be a co-host with you. At the end of 6 months, you go, okay, great. I want you guys to split off and have 2 separate groups and invite people. Go through this evangelism kind of small group material to kind of get you ready. And then in the next 6 months, at the end of the first year as a group, I want you to have a total of 4 groups. And then when you have a total of 4 groups, what we're going to do is we're going to fly out and do a 9 to 5 kind of group training seminar. We're going to come out, we're going to meet everybody, we're going to talk about what does it look like to, in our context, balance the 5 purposes in the context of a small group. And the idea is we're training now everybody there. And then we get not just, the idea here is that we're trying to infuse to get to 70 people. And then if we get to 70 people and we pull off a service, no longer are we paying $250K to drop somewhere where there's nobody. Now we get to show up somewhere where there's 70 people who are an intricate part of our church, and we get potentially anywhere from 10 to 12 small group leaders. So it's not just one person pulling off the service, you have a team of people and a crowd, and it's sustaining, there's not going to be burnout and so forth. So that's how we are doing it, and there's good and bad in there. We've learned that we did it on the reverse, where we picked one person just to start a service, and we went into one area in the city, and the city blocked us. The city said, there was 40 people showing up to a home, and the city said, that's not zoned for a church. And I was talking to the city planner on the phone, like, really, I can't, no, it's too loud and there's too many cars, you can't meet there anymore. Right now there's a prison in Chino that has decided to block our DVDs that we mail every week. They just decided, like, there were 70 men in this men's prison that were watching our sermons every week. They decided to block it. Now that's terrible. Now I gotta figure out how to do that. Those things are gonna happen. But the beauty is that in so many other places, people are coming to know Christ. And ultimately, it's that known thing. And that's what I want to challenge you with everything you're talking about with digital. It's people are looking to be known. Some of them don't know what that means anymore because they're so hardened. But we really do have this proprietary information, that this ability to offer true community. Everything with Facebook, all this stuff, is just kind of shadows. But I'm in the business of trying to figure out how to redeem that. Some of it's working, some of it's not. Some of it we're scrapping, some of it we're starting over. There's things I was doing in 2009 that I thought was huge. I'm a big advocate. In 2009 when I started, I thought the live chat wall was really big. And in our context, because we do small groups, the live chat wall was only a percentage of really what was happening. So we might have at Saddleback on a given week, if I do, it's hard, let's say 20,000 people interact, but we might only have 400 people enter a chat room. Now, I don't know why that's happening in our context, whatever, but it was the percentages weren't effective, so we had to reinvent that. I know other people that do chat rooms with Church Online, and it works really well. But for us, it wasn't, so we had to start with something else, and that for us, it was small groups. But it's thinking about how to figure out how to redeem these channels and always evolving, and don't copy, don't replicate. I know Brian was talking about that last night. But there's things that will work for us. I'll tell anybody, because of my pastor, whenever you sell a book 30 million times, there's going to be some popularity there. We don't have a hard time building a crowd. I never struggle with a crowd. Really, most of my job is funneling them down to a core. So I don't really have to really worry about that end. But I do have to worry like everybody else. How do you get somebody come and see, come and die? How do I get somebody to come to know Jesus and ultimately come to die and give up their entire life? And with online, we're doing that from a service to some classes and training and so forth. But for you and your church, just start having these conversations of not just having a Facebook page and all that stuff, but how can you replicate some of the core aspects of your church online? So it might be Facebook groups, testing that. It might be church online. It might be offering some classes strategically. Maybe you need to get on things like Right Now Media or whatever. And there's tons of ways to slice this. And so I really obviously believe in this. This is what I do. And I could tell you story after story. I'll tell you one last story. I was on a phone call last night. I was talking to Jesse, who's a core volunteer of mine in Singapore. And Jesse has for the last couple of years has offered up a little service in his home. And in Singapore, most of the people meet in high-risers. And Jesse is an amazing guy. I've known him for a while, and the reason why he started this was he was going to churches in an area with his family, and one of his boys is disabled. And the churches weren't really accepting of his boy because his boy would act up. And he eventually, they stopped going because of how severe his son was acting out. And he found other parents that were doing the same thing, 2 other families. So he had known of Pastor Rick, and he Googled and he found our online stream. And so he decided in his little apartment to start streaming the services online. He knew a little keyboard, so he does a little keyboard, a little worship, and he invited these families over. And he has 12 people that come over every week, and a bunch of other kids, and they offer up a little experience of Saddleback in their home. And that stuff, again, like years ago, we were not thinking of. And I know there's going to be another thing that we're not even beginning to think of. But the cool thing is so many people are innovating in this area, you don't even have to. I copy as well and steal. So I was really grateful for Brian's talk on that. And scrap a lot of things. And so I encourage you to replicate what your church's core vision are. Don't make online a gimmick or just a stream. There's so much more with online, and you can do so much of the church. You can combat busyness, materialism, isolation online. There's no doubt. This is what the church does. Why can't we start to do that online in some creative ways? So, thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.